Hello, this is Ina from Taproot Tarot, and I'm finally with you today to tell you about the new premium edition of the Crystal Tarot by Elisabetta Trevisan. I have had this deck for 10 days now and just haven't had a chance to film this for you, so glad to be here. I have been focused on my Drop 'em 78 posts. If those do show up in your feed, I hope I'm not getting too annoying. I feel a little intrusive posting every dang day, but it's a fun project. And if you are following it and enjoying it, that's great. If you are not, that's totally fine. I completely understand. This is one that I've been promising. I did do a fairly in-depth video on the Eudes Picard Pips that inspire the pips in this deck. Now, this deck was originally released as a majors only deck in 1990, I believe, and the artwork is painted on glass with tempera paints. It was originally called Tarocchi di Vetro, which means the glass tarot or even the stained glass tarot. And I've mentioned before, I think in English we call it the crystal tarot for marketing reasons, but I like to think of it as the glass tarot. And they made a really nice choice of putting it on glossy cardstock. Given the history of the art in this deck, I think that was an excellent choice, and it's a really nice glossy cardstock. I'm not usually a big fan because glossy cardstock often sticks. This does not stick. I don't know what it's made out of, something magical, Teflon, I have no idea, but it is so nice, and I'll talk more about it in a second. I think it was 1995 that pips were added, and I've read through some of the artist profiles on Elisabetta Trevisan. She was born in 1947, and as far as I know, is still creating art. She notes that she was commissioned to create a 72 card deck, which kind of explains a little bit of the repetition that happens in the pips. This does come in a nice telescopic box. And it comes with an extended guidebook. At first I was really getting my hopes up about it. And then I thought, you know what? Don't get your hopes up because you know how guidebooks are. And I'm glad I didn't because it's a fairly generic guidebook. I don't want to crap on the author too much, but it doesn't mention Eudes Picard at all. It even sticks with Golden Dawn elemental associations, which Eudes Picard didn't. His associations predated the Golden Dawn. Some of the entries mention some symbols or elements of the artwork, but not too much. You know, they're really pretty general tarot card meanings. So I honestly didn't look super closely. I flipped through at a few key entries to see what it was like and didn't read too closely. This, you'll see, is the original border structure of the artwork that came out in 1990. And I know a lot of people don't like these borders, but I believe they are inherent to the art. I will post an image of the original majors only deck, and it looks like this, but without this bottom part, pretty much. And then this part here, they didn't cut anything else out. I think they just added a little bit more of the color from this section, just to extend that out and place the name in here. So as far as I can tell, nobody has cut any of the art. And this is a glass painting technique. Anyone who has done tempera paints on glass probably knows about this technique of putting some tape down in order to border your painting. So that is my guess as to what she did. Now, there have been many different reprintings of this deck over the years, and sometimes they flip around some of the cards, and you can tell whether or not the cards are flipped by looking for her signature. There you can see E. Trevisan. Sometimes that's backwards. And the one that I was concerned about, which the most recent 2004 edition switches, is the World card. Because in the World, if you reverse that, the 4 evangelicals are in the wrong order. And that is the one I have checked, that they kept that in the original position. So that's good news. In the product descriptions, her art is often compared to Klimt, which you can for sure see in some of these cards, like the Lovers, and I think especially in Strength. But I've seen comments from others who note that her art reminds them more of Paul Klee, Klee, and I looked through some of his artwork, and I can totally see that, especially in the pips. Now, she describes herself as being influenced by pre-Raphaelites, and she even has a version of that painting of Ophelia in the water with the flowers. It's beautiful. And the pre-Raphaelites were those romantic painters of the 1800s who wanted to emulate the simplicity of paintings of the Renaissance, but pre-Raphael. So you can definitely see some of that influence as well. But she's doing her own thing and is definitely her own artist. She is an Italian artist, if I hadn't mentioned that. We've got this beautiful continental deck by an Italian artist with cards inspired by a French tarotist. And for whatever reason, an RWS guidebook. I don't understand, but it's okay. Just can't escape the Golden Dawn and RWS, I suppose, sometimes. But let's check out these cards in a little more detail. First, let's talk about this cardstock. So you will see it is glossy, but it is not sticky at all. And I swear it's probably Teflon, which would normally weird me out, but it's so lovely. It's a fairly thick deck, and it's a little stiff. So we'll compare image to image with the original deck here. And you can see the new image is bigger, and the original borders have been restored. Again, I'll post a link in the description if you want to see what those original cards, Majors Only cards, looked like. And then there's just been an additional bit of color added down here to tie in the title without being too obtrusive, and I think it's just great. This is a controversial opinion, but I am not a fan of borderless decks. Give me some borders so it looks like a tarot card, in my opinion. But I think this is a lovely happy medium for the folks who love the borderless look, but aren't into these over-the-top Lo Scarabeo borders with all the languages and everything. I think this is perfect. And true, as far as I can tell, to her original art. And just a little comparison of the two backs. I do actually really love the 2004 backs. I don't know how those compare to previous versions, but I understand how a lot of people do prefer reversible backs. And these are pretty cool. Can't complain. And we'll just appreciate the beauty of these cards. Point out anything that I notice. The titles are in English. I'm sure originally they were Italian. And to me, this will be the Papess, but she's labeled here the High Priestess. Traditional fruit tree and some hints of some wings, perhaps, in the Empress. Give you a close-up of this eagle. Super traditional Pope. Very cool. I was never sure if she was influenced by Eudes Picard in the making of her triumphs, prior to adding the pips later on, but the presence of the checkerboard that Eudes Picard was fond of, which in his writings represent structure and stability, strategy as well. That makes me wonder if she had been influenced by Picard, even in the creation of her triumphs. Although we see here in Eudes Picard's cards, no presence of the checkerboard in the Chariot or Justice. Absolutely beautiful. One of the favorites, and the lion features quite a bit in the Eudes Picard Pips as well. Super cool death. Absolutely adore this devil. More of the checkerboard pattern, which in later esoteric traditions around the tower would represent Masonic traditions. So dreamy. Oh, and I've forgotten to see which ones were reversed. Oh, look, Judgment was one that was reversed in the last one, but it's the right way in this one. Super gorgeous card. And here, as you can see, we've got the World with the 4 evangelicals in their correct spot. I know the Chariot was another one that had been reversed. There were a few. Let's take a look. I think in the original, one was reversed, and then in later versions, a bunch were. But here we have the Chariot back in the correct position. So that's good news. They seem to have corrected quite a few of the complaints about the previous version of the deck, which has been the one that's available and in print for over 20 years now. This is a pip deck, and if you read pips, I think you can read this just the way that you would any other pip deck, unless you are super invested in the Golden Dawn elemental associations, which are the ones used by the RWS and Thoth Tarot as well. But I think it's worth learning a little bit about some of the representations that Eudes Picard intended. And he did, of course, associate the cups with air and the swords with water. And I don't know much about astrology, but I have read that his reasoning behind that has to do with his emphasis on the houses rather than other ways of reading the different signs. And because of the meanings of the houses, that symbolism matches up really well. Now, he's not super dogmatic and strict about associating certain astrological signs with certain suits. And so you'll see Aries, for example, show up in the swords suit if it happens to align with the symbolism of that particular card. So he has just a very practical approach. Personally, again, I don't layer astrology onto the tarot, so I have the liberty of either ignoring that or just taking it as any other symbol. For example, here Gemini refers to children, and this being the home, or in the Crystal Tarot version, the community, which I think is lovely. The butterfly to Eudes Picard represents sentimentality. We've got 2 of those here. But it's also important to know that it represents the psyche, which is the blend of the mind and emotions. And Eudes Picard doesn't have one suit of intellect, like some systems assign that to the swords. Instead, he represents different types of intellect in all 4 of the suits. This one being more the psyche and the emotional intelligence, which I think is really cool. Eudes Picard's Ace of Chalices depicts a castle, which represents a home, and I love how the Crystal Tarot takes that to a representation of community instead. This one has the duality of sun and moon. And I will link my video on Eudes Picard Pips if you are interested. That'll be in the description box for you. And this card to Eudes Picard means pregnancy. I think that symbolism is pretty obvious. Here we have an eagle breaking out of an egg. So this is the materialization of love, which in Eudes Picard's mind was a child. And here we have Gemini, again representing a child. So it's nice to be aware of his intention behind the symbolism. Even if you don't adhere to it, like I said, you can read this like any other pip deck, and that's certainly what I did when I first got my other version of this deck. And there are some later pips that just become repetitive instead of sticking to Eudes Picard's imagery. Here we have roses, which I remember represented Venus. And here we start getting a little repetitive. So Eudes Picard's system would have various imagery for all these upper pips. And just going out on a limb to guess, I would say maybe this was a bigger project than she was expecting. She says she was commissioned for 72 cards rather than the full 78. So there had to be some reworking of some existing pips. Eudes Picard has the checkerboard in some of the other cards, one of the queens and the page of swords, I think. But Elisabetta Trevisan chose to include it with the Knave of Chalices as well, and I think that's cool. Beautiful Knight of Chalices. All of Eudes Picard's knights have a knight's helmet represented somewhere in the card, but not being worn by the knight. So these fountain flows are supposed to emulate the symbol of Aquarius. And this king's pickaxe represents effort. In my video on the Eudes Picard Pips, I typed up a quick guide to help just get started with some of the symbolism that I was able to glean from his book. And I will go ahead and copy that in the description of this as well, and you are certainly welcome to copy that and use it. Gorgeous aces in this deck. So we've got the symbols of moon and earth here, which represent absorption and depth, with the sun represented above in the Two of Coins, along with some eagles. So a lot of above and below symbolism in these pips. Taurus and Capricorn are down below, representing something like effort and work, and then Virgo up above, representing success in that work. And this is hard to see, but it's a grub or a larva. When it's just below the surface like that, it represents transformation. In this card and the original pips, there are also grubs eating away at the roots as well, either in this card or in another, in which case they represent destruction. Really beautiful. This one has a little bit more general symbolism instead of having different planets in the coins like the original Picard Pips. Unfortunately, in Picard's book, he lists definitions for individual cards, which I think is so annoying. I'd rather have a system for decoding the pips. And he does use such a system, but he doesn't state that. So I had to kind of reverse engineer the meanings he listed for individual pips and notice the patterns and put those together, which I put together in that quick guide for you. So check that out if you want a few hints on the symbolism in here. Not all of it is included. Here we start seeing some of that repetition again. But check out that other video if you want to see the details of the Eudes Picard Pips themselves. Here the page is being entangled by branches. He's not independent. He's maybe entangled by his dependence on others rather than making his own way. There's the knight's helmet here. His court definitions are pretty typical, with the exception of a little bit of symbolism here and there, that I will point out if I remember it. Such a gorgeous queen here. I really think this is one of the most gorgeous decks. This king has worked hard to build everything he has on barren soil, so here he is isolated and alone, only with his success and his things. This deck was true to chalices and coins, but uses wands instead of staves, which is how it's translated in the books that I have. Staves or batons might be more accurate, but wands is fine. This dog, the caduceus in the middle here, and this hazel tree all represent Mercury and should be specific to the three of batons here, but we'll see later that it gets repeated in later pips. All sorts of stable energy here for the four. The square, the lion representing strength and support and power, supporting the square, and then the checkerboard representing stability and strategy. The wheat represents fertility and a product. Same with any fruit being depicted in this deck. And here we see the imagery from the three of batons being repeated again. So this is where you can really just read the pips like you would any other pips. That 6 imagery being repeated here again. Really gorgeous. I love how a lot of the characters, particularly the valets or the knaves, are pretty gender neutral. Even this knight is gender neutral. standing on an arrow of Sagittarius, which represents education. And the checkerboard, again, strategy, planning. Very cool. The wall with a railing on it had a specific meaning. For the King of Batons, I'm blanking out on what it is now, but he is being supported by the power of this lion, the strength of the lion. This sword suit has a pretty negative connotation in Eudes Picard's worldview. This is just kind of the root of troubles. And in Eudes Picard's deck, this would be this direction, I believe, but it's been flipped over here. Beautiful either way. This card represents death. The triangles are change or transformation, in this case a possibly negative one. The fish is belly up and the water lily leaves are sinking to the bottom. So both indicating death in the plant and the fish. The cyclical moons here. And the lotus or water lily in this card is an addition, or the two, by Elisabetta Trevisan, and I think they're beautiful. This all-seeing eye represents conscience. So this card is maybe having a change of heart after doing something bad, or consequences, something like that. And these are where Aries makes an appearance. We can see the ram's horns here, even though it's the water suit. And here we've switched. The sun is being buried down below under the water and the moon is up above. That definitely had some significance, but I don't want to misspeak. So definitely watch that Eudes Picard video if you are curious. And here we are repeating those cyclical moons from before. And the Aries representation with the crustacean. And the cyclical moons again. This is one where Eudes Picard did depict a checkerboard or chessboard for his knight. I love this rendition of it. It's so beautiful. And of course I mean page or valet or knave. This isn't the knight. He's looking very knightly though. And here is the Knight of Swords struggling through the water, but he is determined. And the Queen with Pisces and the moon. She and the King are both standing on crescent moons as vessels on the water. Super gorgeous. What do you think? Do you have the previous versions of this deck? I think this compares really well. It's so pretty. Let's give it a shuffle. I always liked this deck before, and now I absolutely love it. I will definitely be making use of it. It's a tiny bit big for my hands, I'm not gonna lie. But it's doable. And I think with some breaking in, it'll be no problem. See how it shuffles so well for a glossy deck? No sticking whatsoever. I love it. It's magic. You can see the new version is substantially thicker. Look at that. By like a third. My goodness. So yeah, this is a chunky deck, my friends. That might be easier to shuffle it in thirds or something like that instead of halves, but overall I'm so pleased with it. I will definitely use this one more than the other one. I totally get why folks prefer to trim this one, and maybe I will trim this to have a pocket-sized version. But this one, definitely no trimming. This is a perfect level of border for me, definitely. So yeah, please do tell me what you think. If you have the previous version, if you've gotten this version yet, what are your thoughts? And like I said, read this like you would any other pips, or if you want to learn a bit about the Eudes Picard system, check out the video linked in my description below. Just keeping in mind that these pips don't follow Eudes Picard's system all the way through, and that's unfortunate. I was kind of hoping they might add those, but I figured that might be a bit much to ask. How cool would that have been, though, if they had added in some of those missing Eudes Picard pips instead of the repeated ones. But I'm not complaining. It's still fully usable. And it's kind of nice not to have to learn a whole new system to use this. Well, thank you so much for being here. Tell me what you think, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.